Hello. So last year, I gave a number of presentations all around Europe, all on a particular topic. We know that PWA is the future, but we shouldn't abandon Magento 2. That was the core theme of everything I spoke about last year. And that was last year, and I promised that I wouldn't be on stage again this year talking about the same things. So the big question is, are we there yet? Has PWA become the default choice for new projects? Well, you tell me. How many people in this room are currently working with mostly Magento 1 and Magento 2? Okay. And how many are doing mostly PWA, like over 80%? I see some hands, that's amazing. But you can see the difference there. This is what, every year I always come up with a new thing that people can tweet. I would say we're stuck in what I would call the Great Magento delay at the moment. That is that this software is so large, it's deployed in so many places that they always seem to be one step behind slightly when it comes to the front end. And unfortunately, as a room full of developers and managers, we're kind of to blame for that as well. Going from Magento 2 or 1 to PWA is a ginormous paradigm shift. It's enormous in terms of software. But we've done it before. We've done a huge paradigm shift before. And who would like to hazard a guess at what I mean when I say the dark days? Any developer would like to hazard a guess at that? No, that wasn't as dark as this. Going from Magento 1 to Magento 2, this was enormous. Magento 2 was better in every way, but it was different in every way. Everybody was running around with their hands in the air saying, we don't know how to do this, it's crazy. And what most people did, most agencies and companies, they say this: let's just wait till someone else has done it. Which basically translates to, let them suffer first. And this sucks. This is not what we should be doing. I want to really speak to you today, give you some information so that we can all get out of this mindset. Because there's a big problem. And that is if you avoid the pain at the beginning, it's quite nice, right? But you're missing out on the knowledge. And all the developers in the room will know that you learn the most when you solve that bug in production, or when you dig through someone else's code base and you find how this system works and you really understand it. That's where you do all of your learning. That's worth 1,000 blog posts that you can read. So if you're part of the delay at the moment and you're not moving to this new paradigm, you're avoiding pain, but you're missing out on a whole lot of knowledge. So I've only got 30 precious minutes with you, and I've already wasted 3 of them on that intro. So I want to give you, as a room full of Magento developers and managers, I want to give you the most value possible. So I'm sorry, there's going to be no GIFs in this talk, and it is pronounced GIF, by the way. No memes, no live coding, no jokes, although I just broke that. There's not going to be any stories about how I got started in programming or where I went to school. Basically, no filler content. From this point on, there's 3 sections to this talk to help us get into this PWA future. It goes like this. To even get started, again, for a room of people not doing this yet, to even get started, you have to understand how to find the right client. If you don't know the first bit, just stop straight away. Once you know, or you've found that awesome client that's ready to sign on the dotted line, the next thing you need to understand is how it's going to affect your development team, because trust me, everything's going to change. Lastly, you need to learn from the early adopters. So go and talk to Vue Storefront, Deity, people doing PWA Studio, and people like myself. Talk to us and learn the things you need to know about how to actually do it. By the way, I hope that sounds like a good way to spend the next 25 minutes with me. So step 1, you need to know which clients are suitable. If you're going from Magento 1 to Magento 2, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. Don't even bother with the Magento 2 front end. It's not that it's bad or good or anything, it's just that it's such a huge change anyway. you might as well just do the leap and go straight to PWA. Now I've got some hypothetical client examples for you. We'll play a tiny game, and I'm going to explain a client, and we're going to say if they sound suitable for PWA. Through doing this, I'm going to leak out information without it just being some boring slides. So admin XML. This is like that type of client who wants to dig through the Magento admin and find every little place that they can tweak something with XML. They want to go through and basically be in control of the website, ultimate control. They don't want to really involve developers at all. Does that sound like a client suitable for a PWA at this point? Nice. I said I would get you to raise your hands, but if you're going to be vocal, that's even better. Definitely not. Avoid these like the plague for now. What about content-heavy websites? We're in e-commerce, but we know that a lot of our sites have things like, make heavy use of CMS pages, CMS blocks in Magento, page builder, for example. They might have an integrated blog on there as well. Does that sound like a client suitable for a PWA? Yes. No problem with this. We shouldn't just think of PWA as a nice way to navigate a catalog and add to basket. It can be the entire web experience. What about ginormous catalogs? I had to look that up, by the way, because it doesn't look correct on the screen, but that is how you spell it. Ginormous catalogs, thousands, millions of products that have all got to be searchable. Does that sound suitable for a PWA? Yes, I like it. You guys are knowledgeable. So, in fact, this is better to be on PWA, because the worst case scenario is you've got some crappy Magento 2 extension that is making your database lock up because Googlebot has just come through and hit all your category layered navigation, which definitely happens in production a lot. If you move to a PWA architecture, you're not going to have those scaling issues. What about third-party modules? Like those clients where it feels like the site is just a bunch of these modules clicked together like Lego blocks. Does that sound suitable? When they're using like search, mail, reviews, and everything else. So this is the tricky one. This is what this game is all about, getting to this one, because it's a big maybe on this. If the module works in the traditional Magento 2 extension way, where it likes to modify the front end and take over a piece of the page completely, just forget about it. Those types of things aren't suitable right now for building into a PWA. Does it want to add a little bit of JavaScript to the page? Maybe it's adding an event listener to a button, bringing in its own version of jQuery while it's at it, just to do that. Event listener. I've seen this. Those types of things, you have to forget about them. They've completely gone away. Now, if it adds back-end functionality, all the things to do with like transactional emails, SMS, and everything else that goes on behind the scenes, it's likely not going to be a problem. We're really talking about the normal model of building a Magento extension or a third-party module where you have some back-end code and then a view folder with a load of stuff in there that alters the website. That's just not going to fly right now. But it turns out, oh yeah, and the key point there is API only. The key point here is that it's not simple to just say yes to all third-party modules or no to all third-party modules. You need to investigate what your client wants and figure it out. As an example, don't go and put FIFO on there that wants to put like 300 gigabytes of JavaScript on the page just to show you 5 stars. Go and get the Trustpilot API, get the full API access, and you implement them stars yourself in a few lines of JavaScript. So third-party modules, very tricky one, but it's totally doable. This one's just here for completeness. But if you've got a client that's really precious about hosting, like they're happy where they are, they don't want to like mess around with too much, they want the cheapest, they don't want to add any layers of complexity to the stack, obviously this is a no as well. Now don't get me wrong, hosting a PWA is not rocket science. We're not talking Google scale architecture here to do this. But it's just a few more layers than people are used to with a regular Magento 2 store. So if the client's precious about hosting and they don't want to move, forget about it. And that's really the first section. You have to know this. You have to understand how to filter your incoming leads and clients to pick the right ones first. So if they want to be in the admin all day, changing things with XML, forget about it. Content-heavy websites, ginormous catalogs, third-party modules, probably going to be fine. And if they're stuck on hosting, ignore them. Whew. It's not going to slow down, by the way. It's going to get a lot faster. So you've got the clients. You know what is a suitable client. You've got someone ready to sign on the line. You now need to think about your development team. These are the ones who are going to produce this, right? Because there are going to be some big changes. And first of all, I'm assuming here that you're the type of agency or company where you make a distinction between back-end and front-end developer. It just makes this talk easier to write. So, and it should be like that anyway. So what is the role of a back-end developer in a PWA environment? Are they less important, more important? The first thing to say is that they're not going anywhere, sorry. Their role is going to change dramatically, but they're not going anywhere. What's more likely to happen is you just need to increase your front-end team. So don't worry about if you're a back-end developer in the room thinking you're going to be out of a job. Don't worry about that. The main difference is that there's going to be heavy interaction between your front-end developers and your back-end developers. All day long, they're going to be chatting about how they're going to implement some feature, which is very different to the current way we work. But the huge, huge mindset, and again, this talk is tailored for a room full of Magento developers. So the huge mindset, shift in mindset that's needed is to stop thinking about this request comes in, handled by this controller, it goes along, and it produces some layout, basically. That goes away in a headless environment. Back-end developers need to be looking at all features that they build as nothing more than APIs. Often that's going to be driven by what the front-end need. So that's a really, really large change for a lot of people. And that's going to catch a lot of you off guard. But that's all right. That's all about moving forward. And there's still a huge portion of back-end work that still needs to be done, of course. All your data migrations, talking to all the third-party services and installing modules and whatever else goes on. That's all still going to be there with the PWA, so don't worry, there's plenty of work to do. Another main thing is that front-end developers are now going to be the ones that drive the development of the API. This is crucial in a PWA. What would typically happen is back-end will just throw a REST API over the wall and say, here you go, here's a model exposed at this endpoint, go and do what you want with it. And then you query it, and you just wanted 2 fields, and it gives you back 50,000 lines of JSON. No, that's not going to happen anymore. The front end are going to say, we want this data in this format, and we want to, if it's a mutation, we want to do it in like this and get this data back, etc., etc., all in the name of performance and all in the name of reducing HTTP requests. If you just think about how you currently work, it's very unlikely that your front end are directing what the back end actually build. But trust me, that's going to be how it plays out. And I can't remember what I put as the last one. Yeah. But don't worry too much, back-end developers. It's not like everything's going to change. In reality, a lot of what you're going to do is just taking existing Magento GraphQL queries, adding fields to it, maybe add a new query here or there. There's a lot of that going on. So that's the back end. What about the front end? This is an equally large, if not bigger, change. And this is going to probably catch a lot of people out. Because we're doing PWA all the things now, you might be thinking, well, it's just going from jQuery and Knockout to React or Vue or Angular, right? Wrong. When you have no page reloads resetting your state, things are very different. Take a second to think about everything you've ever fixed in your life by turning it off and turning it back on again. I saw a really great tweet about that recently. It's so true, right? So many things we fix by doing that. Now, what is a page reload on a website? It's an opportunity to reset state in terms of event handlers and everything else that you've got going on. What is a navigation event? So in a Magento 2 store, you click on one page, you go to the next page, you've just reset your state back to a clean environment. This is what people don't quite understand when we talk about going to a PWA or a headless environment. They think all they have to learn is React, when in reality, what you have to learn is how to build large JavaScript applications. This is the hard bit. Because most of us are just used to using Knockout. Even if you're doing Knockout in a very object-oriented way and you're doing it all by the documentation, you're doing really well. Trust me, it's very, very different when you don't have that safety net of a page reload to reset your state every time. So front-end developers are going to have to retrain. They're going to have to retrain how to build actual applications rather than just some click handler on some button. How to choose clients, step 1. How it affects your development team. There's the outline. They probably need to retrain in some areas. The next thing is you need to learn from the early adopters. And what I realized, and this was a complete mistake, sorry, not a mistake, but just like a coincidence, I guess, is that I'm going to present to you 5 tips. Turns out they're not even related to React or any in particular framework. They're just it's just general advice about how to release single-page applications, how to release software, and yeah, kind of these are 5 starting points that I would recommend everyone begin with. Tip 1. Implement browser-based UI testing really early on, like straight away. You just have to trust me on this. It's not the coolest thing to talk about or the sexiest thing to work in, but you need to get this in place right from the beginning. If you want to be in a situation where you can release 2, 3, 4 times a day, you need to have ultimate confidence in the thing you've built. If your code base is mostly consistent of unit tests right now, you're doing it wrong. Leave the unit testing to the people writing the frameworks and the PWA Studio and the frameworks that power these PWAs. Your code is about plumbing together components. Of course, you're going to have some unit tests, but most of your tests should be fully some kind of browser actually clicking around your site. So just using something like Cypress as an example, you need to be implementing this in CI early. Like the first week you sign this project and you've got a developer on it, make it their job to figure this out locally, to run these tests, and to get it working in the CI environment so that you've got the ultimate confidence in what you've built. That's tip number 1, just kind of start with it. I can't stress that one enough. Tip 2, decide on server-side rendering early. And notice here I'm not saying do server-side rendering, I'm saying you need to decide on it. Again, something you just have to trust me on. You do not want to have to retrofit this onto an existing app if you need it. For those not 100% sure what I mean, you probably can't see what this code says, it doesn't really matter. But the small one on the left shows an instance where you could call it partial server-side rendering, where you have like some meta information, maybe a title tag, and the one on the right has the same stuff, but then it also has some extra HTML that's actually the page content. You can see the difference there, kind of outlined in red. You've got to understand, if you need this, right from the beginning. It's going to affect your routing on the front end, it's going to affect performance, it's going to affect every single aspect of your application. This is going to affect, so you need to know if you need it or not. One of the problems with this is even recently when Google came out and said, well, Googlebot is now using an evergreen browser, and people kind of took that as a way of saying, well, we definitely don't need server-side rendering anymore. But the reality is that might happen like a week or 2 later. If your website has content that you want to see immediately when you hit reload in a browser, or sorry, if you want it to be reflected immediately when someone makes a curl request to your server, like some ad service or something else, or if your content is like time sensitive and it needs to be changed there and then and reflected across search engines, you probably do need to do some kind of server-side rendering. Now, if you do it, you need to make sure you have unit tests for it. And this kind of seems to go against the first tip, but trust me, I'm not too proud to say that we had a checkout go down for 2 hours at one point because we hadn't tested the rendering of a particular page. The problem is obviously on the server you don't have access to all the window variables and everything like that. So just make it a case where even if it's just 1 unit test per route, so let's say you have the home page and then you have some extra code that's lazy loaded for a category or product page. Make sure you have at least 1 unit test covering the full rendering of one of those. Just spin up a small node server in CI. It's not complicated to do. Make sure you get this in there. And this is just kind of a secondary tip. But if you're going to do server-side rendering, don't bother with state. Just do the stuff that's really important for the SEO stuff or for the shell. And don't worry about trying to layer in things about being logged in or logged out. It's too complicated. Step 3. Something I'd see almost no one talking about, which boggles my mind a little bit, Developing a strong versioning strategy is the key to this fast deployment. If you have the client-side code on the left there, you want to be able to push out a release in a way that does a little handshake with your service worker in a way that any sort of outdated code can be updated. And I'm not talking here about using something like Workbox to generate part of the service worker so that it's invalidated the next time the browser checks. I'm talking about something completely different. Imagine you're navigating through a site and you're doing that for an hour, for example. This is possible. And someone pushes out a critical bug fix. Maybe on every navigation, you want to just ping the service worker and say, try and update, see if there's a change on the server. Because in a PWA, no one's hitting reload in the browser very often, so they're probably not getting your updates. So you need to build into your system right at the beginning an automated command that will go through, version your code. Could just be bumping a version in your package.json or whatever. But it also needs to put that version in the service worker. And you need to have a little handshake that goes on at many periods throughout the life cycle of the app that allows things to keep up to date. That talk alone could be an hour on its own, so I can't give you much more detail. Just trust me on the words there. Have a strong versioning strategy. And it's all about making sure that your client-side JavaScript is in sync with your service worker. Really, really important. It's too easy to brick your website or to make it that people aren't seeing updates and changes. This is really, really important. You need to investigate it and make sure it's one of the first things you do. Tip 4. Don't invalidate the entire cache for every deploy. Can anyone think of some software that does this at the moment? What's this? A version string in the directory name of all the assets that gets bumped on every deploy, even if you haven't changed any assets. This is very easy to actually do in a PWA. Just with the wrong Webpack config, you can accidentally bump all of your hashes on your file names. But more importantly, don't go down the path of thinking, well, if we deploy to each directory, if we put the version name in a directory, for example, that makes our life simpler. It's also just thrown away all of the cached assets on someone's phone. For example, in a large PWA, you may have a service worker that's proactively pre-caching a lot of content. And if you get the versioning, if you get the deployment, if you get the build configuration incorrect, you can end up throwing that away every single deploy. So don't do that. You probably need to deploy to the same directory in some way. Doesn't matter if you do it with some fancy server rewrites or something, but the concept is the same, that the browser sees every release asset in the same directory. And while you're at it, make sure you're in the Webpack config that you're using the correct hashes, because if you don't, what can happen is, even though you just change one file that's lazy loaded really far down the line in some account area, you can end up rewriting all the hashes for everything. So that's tip 4. Again, these are things people often don't talk about, so I'm trying to give you new information here. And then tip 5, load features on demand. Now you might be thinking that I'm just talking about, you're on a home page, you click a product, you load in the code for the product page. I'm not talking about that, because if you're here listening to a talk on PWA, I would kind of say that's the baseline. That's kind of a given that you're doing that you're loading in code as you navigate around the site. That's a given. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about stuff like this, where on this page, actually tapping on the image loaded the code for the Zoom library. It appeared really quick because the service worker was kind of pre-caching some of it, but ignoring the service worker for a second, the idea is that many people won't ever click on that image. So we're not even going to lazy load it in after the fact. We're actually going to wait for user interaction. Loading features on user interaction is a really, really powerful technique. No one talks about this as much, but we should really, really be doing it. Another example, which is kind of in the same thing of loading features on demand, but it's a slightly different angle, is something like this. So tapping the menu button there, it causes a drawer to come over that's animated with CSS, and a menu pops in. The reason the menu pops in like that is that we discovered on older Android devices that having that navigation rendered but off screen is taking up precious memory. And even if you go down all the tricks of memorizing the React tree so it doesn't do too much diffing or whatever. The point is it's still there. It still gets computated at some point. And what we found is a really jagged, sort of juddery animation as the draw came over. So the point here is the same as the last one. If the user never clicks the menu button, we shouldn't even be rendering that menu at all. So the fix was simple. Show the draw. It's just an empty white box. Wait for the animation to finish, load in the menu. It meant that even on older Android devices, it was a nice, smooth animation. So that's another example of loading things when the user asks for it rather than when you think it's suitable. So yeah, the baseline is CSS and JavaScript lazy loading. I'm assuming you're already doing that. That's absolutely the baseline. Wait for user interaction if you can to load more stuff in, and don't waste memory off screen. That's like, I can't give you much more in this short time period. That's some advice from the early adopters. Implement browser-based UI testing from the start. Don't delay this. Don't think it's something you'll get around to. Get it working in CI. Decide on server-side rendering early because it's going to affect every part of your development. Develop a strong versioning strategy. Figure out what that means. Come and talk to me after if you're not 100% sure, because I know it's a bit vague. Don't invalidate the cache. We're trying to move above Magento 2 frontend. We're not trying to replicate it. And then load features on demand. That last one, that's just an interesting one from a software point of view because you get to figure out different problems. So that's it. 3 sections. Hope it was useful. Know which clients are suitable. Understand how it's going to affect your development team and learn from the early adopters. That's how you do PWA. And we're hiring right now, or rather I'm hiring. So if you want to come and work with me on this stuff, talk to me after. Thank you.